The weathered planks of the old train depot creaked underfoot as the last light of an October afternoon bled into dusk. Nestled on the edge of Willow Junction, a faded railroad town clinging to its past, the station stood as a relic, its chipped paint and rusted benches whispering stories of busier days. Inside, the ticket booth glowed with a single bulb, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Mabel Thornton, the station's lone clerk, ruled this quiet domain with an iron grip softened by a sly smile. At 62, she was a stout woman with a mop of white curls and eyes that could spot a fib from a mile away. She'd worked the counter for 30 years, priding herself on knowing every face that passed through, who was local, who was lost, who was trouble. Tonight, as she sorted tickets and traded quips with a handful of regulars waiting for the 6:15 to St. Louis, the door squeaked open, and a stranger stepped in, a woman whose silent arrival carried a weight Mabel couldn't place, an enigma that would turn her dusty kingdom upside down before the train's whistle blew. The newcomer was a black woman in her late 50s, her frame slight but steady, dressed in a plain wool coat and a knit scarf that draped loosely around her shoulders. Her hair, streaked with gray, was tucked into a modest bun, and she carried a small canvas satchel, its edges frayed from use. She moved with a deliberate calm, her steps soft against the creaky floor, and settled onto a bench near the back, her satchel resting beside her. The depot's chatter, a farmer griping about crop prices, a widow recounting her day, faltered for a heartbeat as eyes flicked toward her, then returned to their routines. Mabel, wiping her hands on her apron, watched from behind the counter, her curiosity piqued. "Who's this now?" she thought, tilting her head. "Doesn't look like a traveler. Maybe she's waiting for someone." "Evening," Mabel called out, her voice carrying that practiced mix of warmth and suspicion she reserved for outsiders. "What can I do you for?" The woman glanced up, her eyes steady behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Just here for the 6:15, she said, her tone polite but clipped, signaling she wasn't in the mood for chatter. Mabel raised an eyebrow, pouring herself a cup of coffee from the pot behind the counter. 6:15, huh? St. Louis run. Tickets $5. Got cash? Are you one of those card folks?" "Cash," the woman replied, fishing a crumpled bill from her satchel and sliding it across the counter. Mabel took it, smoothing it out with a grunt. "Most people don't show up this early. Train's a good 20 minutes off. You in a hurry to sit and wait?" The woman smiled faintly, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression. "I like the quiet," she said, settling back onto the bench. "Gives me time to watch." "Watch?" Mabel chuckled, loud enough to draw a nod from the farmer nearby. "Ain't much to see here, just old planks and older folks. This ain't no picture show." The farmer snickered, egging her on, but the woman didn't bite. She pulled a worn paperback from her satchel, some dog-eared mystery novel, and opened it, her silence a shield Mabel couldn't pierce. Minutes ticked by, the depot's clock groaning with each sweep of its hands. Mabel's curiosity curdled into something sharper. She didn't like puzzles she couldn't solve. She leaned over the counter, her voice dropping a notch. "You from around here? Don't look familiar, and I know everybody who's anybody in Willow Junction." "Just passing through," the woman said, not looking up from her book. "Taking it all in." Mabel's grin twisted into a frown. "Taking it all in? What's that supposed to mean? This place ain't a tourist trap. People come, they go, that's it." The widow nearby chuckled, but the woman stayed quiet, turning a page. Mabel straightened, wiping her hands again, though they were already clean. "Well, you're a strange one, I'll give you that. Most folks got a story to tell. Yours must be locked up tight." "Don't need to tell it," the woman replied, closing her book with a soft thud. She stood, slinging her satchel over her shoulder, and headed toward a door marked "Employees Only" at the side of the depot. Mabel's patience snapped like a dry twig. "Hey, hold it right there," she barked, rounding the counter. "That's off limits. You can't just waltz in wherever you please." The woman didn't stop, pushing the door open and stepping inside. Mabel turned to the farmer, incredulous. "You see that? Who does she think she is, Queen of the Rails?" The farmer shrugged, sipping his coffee. "Dunno, Mabel. Maybe you ought to check." Muttering under her breath, Mabel stormed after her, her boots thudding against the floor. She didn't know it yet, but the night was about to spin on its axis, and the stranger behind that door held a truth that would rattle her rusty throne to its core. Mabel shoved the door open, ready to unleash a tirade, but the sight stopped her dead. The woman sat at a small desk in the cluttered office, papers stacked high, a rotary phone gathering dust, flipping through a ledger with a calm that bordered on eerie. A ring of keys lay beside her, glinting under the flicker of a bare bulb. "What in tarnation do you think you're doing?" Mabel demanded, her voice bouncing off the walls. "This ain't your playground. Get out before I call the sheriff." The woman looked up, her gaze cool and unflinching. "I could ask you the same, Mabel." The use of her name hit like a slap, freezing Mabel mid-step. "How do you know me? And who are you, barging in here like you run the place?" The woman leaned back, folding her hands over the ledger. "Because I do. Name's Esther Hargrove. I own this depot." Mabel's jaw dropped, her brain scrambling to catch up. "Own it? You're off your rocker. This station's been Old Man Pritchard's since forever." Esther shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Pritchard was my uncle. He passed 2 years back, left it to me in his will. I've been managing it from St. Louis, keeping an eye on things, listening to the whispers. Tonight, I came to see it for myself." Mabel blinked, the words sinking in like cold rain. Pritchard, crusty, chain-smoking Pritchard, had been the depot's heart for decades, barking orders and counting tickets until his lungs gave out. Rumor had it he'd willed the place to a niece, but Mabel had pictured some flashy city type, not this quiet woman with a scarf and a paperback. "You're lying," she said, though her voice faltered. "Prove it." Esther slid the keyring across the desk, keys Mabel recognized from Pritchard's old chain, the ones he'd kept in a locked drawer. "These say otherwise," she said, her tone steady. Mabel stared, the truth clawing its way through her disbelief. Esther continued, her voice firm but not harsh. "I've been watching you, Mabel, for months. Heard how you talk to folks, how you decide who's welcome, who's not. Tonight was the last test." Mabel's face burned, a mix of defiance and shame flaring up. "Test? I've kept this place running smooth. Know every ticket, every face. You can't just—" "I can," Esther interrupted, standing now, her scarf slipping slightly to reveal a silver necklace, a keepsake Mabel vaguely recalled Pritchard wearing. "You've got a knack for running things. I'll give you that. But you judge people before they sit down. That ends now." She stepped past Mabel, heading back to the depot floor. Mabel followed, her certainty crumbling with every step. The room hushed as Esther emerged, Mabel trailing like a shadow. The farmer and widow turned, sensing the shift. Esther raised her voice, clear and resonant. "Evening, folks. I'm Esther Hargrove, the new owner of Willow Junction Depot. Took over from my Uncle Pritchard a while back." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Gasps, whispers, a spoon clinking against a mug. Esther turned to Mabel, her gesture sharp. "And this woman's done her last shift here." Mabel's knees wobbled. "You're firing me? For what? A few sharp words?" Esther's gaze held steady. "For treating people like they don't belong. For thinking this place is yours to gatekeep. Everyone gets a fair shake here. Travelers, strangers, me. You forgot that." The depot buzzed with low voices. The farmer nodded slowly. The widow's eyes widened in approval. Mabel sputtered, "I was just keeping things lively. It's how I do my job." "Lively doesn't mean putting folks down," Esther said, her tone final. "Pack up, Mabel, you're out." The words hit like a freight train. Mabel stood rooted, the weight of her own bluster crashing down. Slowly, she shuffled to the counter, grabbing her coat and a tin of mints she'd kept by the register. The depot watched, a quiet mix of shock and understanding settling over them. Esther faced the crowd again, her demeanor softening. "This station's been a lifeline for years. My uncle made it that way. I'm here to keep it going, make it better. No one gets turned away, no one gets judged. That's my word." The room broke into a soft clap. Not loud, but earnest, the kind that comes from folks who've lived enough to value fairness. Esther nodded, a quiet resolve in her eyes. Mabel slipped out the side door, the dusk swallowing her silhouette. She'd ruled that counter for decades, thinking she held the keys. Now she saw the cost of her quick tongue, a lesson carved deep, one she'd carry long after the last train rolled through. Weeks turned to months, and Willow Junction Depot found a new pulse under Esther's care. She didn't hover, just worked the place with a steady hand, fixing benches, updating schedules, greeting every passenger like they mattered. She hired a new clerk, a chatty retiree named Sam, who swapped stories without a hint of judgment. The regulars adjusted. Some missed Mabel's sharp wit, but most warmed to the change. The depot felt airier, more open, a hub where tales spun freely and no one felt small. Esther kept her satchel by the ticket booth, her paperback a constant companion. Travelers started asking about her life, her plans, and she'd share snippets. A career in bookkeeping, a quiet life upended by Pritchard's will, a vow to honor his legacy. She listened more than she spoke, her glasses catching the light as she noted details Mabel had overlooked. Tired commuters needing a kind word, locals hiding their struggles. One evening, the farmer lingered after buying his ticket. "You've done good here," he said, tipping his cap. "Mabel was a character, but she didn't see us. Not like you do." Esther smiled, adjusting her scarf. "Takes years to learn that. I'm still at it." He nodded, leaving a nickel tip before heading to the platform. Esther watched him go, then turned back to the booth, the depot humming around her. It wasn't just a job, it was a trust, passed from Pritchard, now hers to uphold. She'd faced Mabel's snap judgments not for spite, but for fairness, and the reward was this: a station alive with faces, each one valued. Mabel didn't fade entirely. Word trickled back she'd taken a job at a gas station up the highway. Quieter now, less bold. Some said she'd softened, others doubted it. But at the depot, her absence carved space for something richer, a testament scratched into the wood and dust that dignity builds more than pride ever could. For Esther, it was enough. She'd entered as a stranger, dismissed and sized up, only to claim what was hers and set it right. The depot stood as proof. Sometimes the quiet ones hold the keys, and the loudest voices hush when truth steps through the door. One stranger reclaimed a station's spirit. This tale proves that dignity outlasts pride every time. If Esther's quiet strength spoke to you, drop a like to show it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories that warm the heart. What would you take from Mabel's misstep? Share your insights in the comments below. We're eager to hear. Until next time, hold this close. True power rides the silent rails.